Never forget, the press is the enemy. The establishment is the enemy. The professors are the enemy. Professors are the enemy. Write that on a blackboard 100 times and never forget it. I was not lying. I said things that later on seemed to be untrue. Only if you have been in the deepest valley can you ever know how magnificent it is to be on the highest mountain. Nothing would please the Kremlin more than to have the people of this country choose a second-rate president. I don't think a woman should be in any government job, whatever. I mean, I really don't. The reason why I do is mainly because they are erratic and emotional. Those who hate us only win if we hate them back. The Bohemian Grove, which I attend from time to time, it is the most faggy goddamn thing you could ever imagine. The greatness comes not when things go always good for you. But the greatness comes when you're really tested, when you take some knocks, some disappointments, when sadness comes. Because only if you've been in the deepest valley can you ever know how magnificent it is to be on the highest mountain. We must always remember that America is a great nation today, not because of what government did for people, but because of what people did for themselves and for one another. The Chinese use 2 brushstrokes to write the word crisis. One brushstroke stands for danger, the other for opportunity. The Jews are irreligious, atheistic, immoral bunch of bastards. Here may be some truth in that if the Arabs have some complaints about my policy towards Israel, they have to realize that the Jews in the U.S. control the entire information and propaganda machine, the large newspapers, the motion pictures, radio and television, and the big companies, and there is a force that we have to take into consideration. When the strongest nation in the world can be tied up for years in a war with no end in sight, when the richest nation in the world can't manage its own economy, when the nation with the greatest tradition of the rule of law is plagued by unprecedented lawlessness, and when the President of the United States cannot travel abroad or to any major city at home without fear of a hostile demonstration, then it's time for new leadership for the United States of America. Being trustworthy is something you are, something you stand for, and a core value you live by. It isn't something you can train for, nor is it something you can manipulate. You either have those values or you don't. To me, the most unhappy people in the world are the people in Palm Beach going to parties every night, playing golf every afternoon, then bridge. No purpose. When information which properly belongs to the public is systematically withheld by those in power, the people soon become ignorant of their own affairs, distrustful of those who manage them, and, eventually, incapable of determining their own destinies. If you want to make beautiful music, you must play the black and the white notes together. The peace we seek in the world is not the flimsy peace which is merely an interlude between wars, but a peace which can endure for generations to come. It is important that we understand both the necessity and the limitations of America's role in maintaining that peace. Unless we in America work to preserve the peace, there will be no peace. Unless we in America work to preserve freedom, there will be no freedom. No president in history has been more vilified or was more vilified during the time he was president than Lincoln. Those who knew him, his secretaries, have written that he was deeply hurt by what was said about him and drawn about him, but on the other hand, Lincoln had the great strength of character never to display it, always able to stand tall and strong and firm no matter how harsh or unfair the criticism might be. These elements of greatness, of course, inspire us all today. We are not spending the federal government's money, we are spending the taxpayers' money, and it must be spent in a way which guarantees his money's worth and yields the fullest possible benefit to the people being helped. If you are ever going to lie, you go to jail for the lie rather than the crime. So believe me, don't ever lie. To the ordinary guy, all this is a bunch of gobbledygook. But out of the gobbledygook comes a very clear thing: you can't trust the government, you can't believe what they say, and you can't rely on their judgment. What we have done with the American Indian is its way as bad as what we imposed on the Negroes. We took a proud and independent race and virtually destroyed them. We have to find ways to bring them back into decent lives in this country. I have the greatest affection for them, but I know they're not going to make it for 500 years. They aren't. You know it, too. The Mexicans are a different cup of tea. They have a heritage. At the present time they steal, they're dishonest, but they do have some concept of family life. They don't live like a bunch of dogs, which the Negroes do live like. Economic power is not the same as strength of national character. Our country may be rich in goods, but we are poor in spirit. You must pursue this investigation of Watergate even if it leads to the president. I'm innocent. You've got to believe I'm innocent. If you don't, take my job. I want a goddamn strong statement on marijuana. I mean one that just tears the ass out of them. You know, it's a funny thing, every one of the bastards that are out for legalizing marijuana is Jewish. But it's not just the ratty part of town. The upper class in San Francisco is that way. The Bohemian Grove, which I attend from time to time, it is the most faggy goddamn thing you could ever imagine, with that San Francisco crowd. I can't shake hands with anybody from San Francisco. Before we become too arrogant with the most deadly of the 7 deadly sins, the sin of pride, let us remember that the 2 great wars of this century, wars which cost 20 million dead, were fought between Christian nations praying to the same God. I'm not for women, frankly, in any job. I don't want any of them around. Thank God we don't have any in the cabinet. As long as I'm sitting in the chair, there's not going to be any Jew appointed to that court. No Jew can be right on the criminal law issue. Never say no when a client asks for something, even if it is the moon. You can always try, and anyhow there is plenty of time afterwards to explain that it was not possible. We can no longer afford to consider air and water common property, free to be abused by anyone without regard to the consequences. Instead, we should begin now to treat them as scarce resources, which we are no more free to contaminate than we are free to throw garbage into our neighbor's yard. Because there are no local or state boundaries to the problems of our environment, the federal government must play an active, positive role. We can and will set standards. We can and will exercise leadership. Under the doctrine of separation of powers, the manner in which the president personally exercises his assigned executive powers is not subject to questioning by another branch of government. A public man must never forget that he loses his usefulness when he as an individual, rather than his policy, becomes the issue. By the time you get dressed, drive out there, play 18 holes and come home, you've blown 7 hours. There are better things you can do with your time. Let us begin by committing ourselves to the truth, to see it like it is, and tell it like it is, to find the truth, to speak the truth, and to live the truth. Let us begin by committing ourselves to the truth, to see it like it is, and tell it like it is, to find the truth, to speak the truth, and to live the truth. The peace we seek to win is not victory over any other people, but the peace that comes with healing in its wings, with compassion for those who have suffered, with understanding for those who have opposed us, with the opportunity for all the peoples of this earth to choose their own destiny. You must never give up. You must remember that you have to take risks in order to achieve anything, and sometimes you will suffer defeat. But the mark of any individual is to recover from defeat and disappointment and go on and give it his best shot. A man who has never lost himself in a cause bigger than himself has missed one of life's mountaintop experiences. Only in losing himself does he find himself. Only then does he discover all the latent strengths he never knew he had and which otherwise would have remained dormant. If I were to make public these tapes, containing blunt and candid remarks on many different subjects, the confidentiality of the office of the president would always be suspect. The answer to many of the domestic problems we face is not higher taxes and more spending. It is less waste, more results, and greater freedom for the individual American to earn a rightful place in his own community, and for states and localities to address their own needs in their own ways, in the light of their own priorities. In the long term, we can hope that religion will change the nature of man and reduce conflict. But history is not encouraging in this respect. The bloodiest wars in history have been religious wars. The ability to be cool, confident, and decisive in crisis is not an inherited characteristic, but is the direct result of how well the individual has prepared himself for the battle. While technically I did not commit a crime, an impeachable offense. These illegalisms, as far as the handling of this matter is concerned, it was so botched up, I made so many bad judgments. The worst ones, mistakes of the heart, rather than the head. But let me say, a man in that top job, he's got to have a heart, but his head must always rule his heart. It is essential that we take steps to prevent chemical substances from becoming environmental hazards. Unless we develop better methods to assure adequate testing of chemicals, we will be inviting the environmental crisis of the future. Americans admire a people who can scratch a desert and produce a garden. The Israelis have shown qualities that Americans identify with: guts, patriotism, idealism, a passion for freedom. I have seen it. I know. I believe that. At home, we must reject the mistaken notion, the notion that has dominated too much of the public dialogue for too long, that ever bigger government is the answer to every problem. Certainly in the next 50 years we shall see a woman president, perhaps sooner than you think. A woman can and should be able to do any political job that a man can do. As you know, the separation of church and state is not subject to discussion or alteration. Under our Constitution, no church or religion can be supported by the U.S. government. We maintain freedom of religion so that an American can either worship in the church of his choice or choose to go to no church at all. If, when the chips are down, the world's most powerful nation, the United States of America, acts like a pitiful, helpless giant, the forces of totalitarianism and anarchy will threaten free nations and free institutions throughout the world. In our own lives, let each of us ask, not just what will government do for me, but what can I do for myself? In the challenges we face together, let each of us ask, not just how can government help, but how can I help? Our youth cannot understand why society chooses to criminalize a behavior with so little visible ill effect or adverse social impact. These young people have jumped the fence and found no cliff. And the disrespect for the possession laws fosters a disrespect for laws and the system in general. On top of this is the distinct impression among the youth that some police may use the marijuana laws to arrest people they don't like for other reasons, whether it be their politics, their hairstyle, or their ethnic background. I have never been a quitter. To leave office before my term is completed is opposed to every instinct in my body. But as president, I must put the interests of America first. Therefore, I shall resign the presidency effective at noon tomorrow. The destiny of our land, the air we breathe, the water we drink is not in the mystical hands of an uncontrollable agent, it is in our hands. A future which brings the balancing of our resources, preserving quality with quantity, is a future limited only by the boundaries of our will to get the job done. People have got to know whether or not their president is a crook. Well, I'm not a crook. I earned everything I've got. Fate has ordained that the men who went to the moon to explore in peace will stay on the moon to rest in peace. These brave men, Neil Armstrong and Edwin Aldrin, know that there is no hope for their recovery. But they also know that there is hope for mankind in their sacrifice. Government has the responsibility to provide the climate in which Americans, all Americans, have an opportunity for good jobs, and not only for good jobs, but an opportunity, if they have the ability and the desire, to be owners and managers, to have a piece of the action, because if they have a piece of the action, then they believe in the system rather than fighting against it. We are committed to cleaning up the air and cleaning up the water. But we also are committed to a strong economy, and we are not going to allow the environmental issue to be used sometimes falsely and sometimes in a demagogic way, basically to destroy the system, the industrial system that made this the great country it is. Nothing matters more to the future of this nation than ensuring that our young men and women learn to believe in themselves and believe in their dreams, and that they develop this capacity, that you develop this capacity, so that you keep it all of your lives. I believe one of America's most priceless assets is the idealism which motivates the young people of America. My generation has invested all that it has, not only its love, but its hope and faith, in yours. As our cities and suburbs relentlessly expand, those priceless open spaces needed for recreation areas accessible to their people are swallowed up, often forever. Unless we preserve these spaces while they are still available, we will have none to preserve. The great question of the 70s is, shall we surrender to our surroundings, or shall we make our peace with nature and begin to make reparations for the damage we have done to our air, to our land, and to our water? There are some people, you know, they think the way to be a big man is to shout and stomp and raise hell, and then nothing ever really happens. I'm not like that. I never shoot blanks. Once one determines that he or she has a mission in life, that it's not going to be accomplished without a great deal of pain, and that the rewards in the end may not outweigh the pain if you recognize historically that always happens, then when it comes, you survive it. The average American is just like the child in the family. You give him some responsibility and he is going to amount to something. He is going to do something. If, on the other hand, you make him completely dependent and pamper him and cater to him too much, you are going to make him soft, spoiled, and eventually a very weak individual. We believe that part of the answer lies in pricing energy on the basis of its full costs to society. One reason we use energy so lavishly today is that the price of energy does not include all of the social costs of producing it. The costs incurred in protecting the environment and the health and safety of workers, for example, are part of the real costs of producing energy, but they are not now all included in the price of the product. Jesus, this song you wrote, the words are sticking in my throat. Peace on earth, hear it every Christmas time, but hope in history won't rhyme, so what's it worth? This peace on earth, when I spoke at the St. Lawrence Seaway ceremonies in 1969, I borrowed some words from the monument there which I had joined Queen Elizabeth in dedicating just 10 years before. That monument, as its inscription puts it, bears witness to the common purpose of two nations whose frontiers are the frontiers of friendship, whose ways are the ways of freedom, whose works are the works of peace. Life isn't meant to be easy. It's hard to take being on the top or on the bottom. I guess I'm something of a fatalist. You have to have a sense of history, I think, to survive some of these things. Life is one crisis after another. Violence or the threat of violence never be permitted to influence the actions or judgments of the university community. Once it does, the community, almost by definition, ceases to be a university. It is for this reason that from time immemorial expulsion has been the primary instrument of university discipline. Violence or the threat of violence never be permitted to influence the actions or judgments of the university community. Once it does, the community, almost by definition, ceases to be a university. It is for this reason that from time immemorial expulsion has been the primary instrument of university discipline. To a crisis of the spirit, we need an answer of the spirit. To find that answer, we need only look within ourselves. When we listen to the better angels of our nature, we find that they celebrate the simple things, the basic things, such as goodness, decency, love, kindness. Greatness comes in simple trappings. There is an international disease which feeds on the notion that if you have a cause to defend, you can use any means to further your cause, since the end justifies the means. As an international community, we must oppose this notion, whether it be in Canada, in the United States, or anywhere else. No cause justifies violence as long as the system provides for change by peaceful means. The Soviet Union began by banishing God. The United States began as a community of people who wanted to worship God as they chose. Man does not live by bread alone. Those in the United States whose desire to create a strictly secular society is as strong as Lenin's should study this Cold War lesson closely. Communism was defeated by an alliance spearheaded by one nation under God. Why would anyone want to be president today? The answer is not one of glory or fame. Today the burdens of the office outweigh its privileges. It's not because the presidency offers a chance to be somebody, but because it offers a chance to do something. Reading not only enlarges and challenges the mind, it also engages and exercises the brain. Today's youth who sits mesmerized by a television screen is not going to be tomorrow's leader. Television watching is passive. Reading is active. With all our differences, whenever we are confronted with a threat to our security, we are not then Republicans or Democrats, but Americans. We are not then the 50 states, but the United States. The more you stay in this kind of job, the more you realize that a public figure, a major public figure, is a lonely man. I made my mistakes, but in all of my years in public life, I have never profited from public service. I have earned every cent. And in all of my years of public life, I have never obstructed justice. And I think, too, that I could say that in my years of public life, that I welcome this kind of examination, because people have got to know whether or not their president is a crook. Well, I am not a crook. I have earned everything I have got. I made my mistakes, but in all of my years in public life, I have never profited from public service. I have earned every cent. And in all of my years of public life, I have never obstructed justice. And I think, too, that I could say that in my years of public life, that I welcome this kind of examination, because people have got to know whether or not their president is a crook. Well, I am not a crook. I have earned everything I have got. As we work to expand our supplies of energy, we should also recognize that we must balance those efforts with our concern to preserve our environment. In the past, as we have sought new energy sources, we have too often damaged or despoiled our land. Sharp increases in the minimum wage rate are also inflationary. Frequently, workers paid more than the minimum gauge their wages relative to it. This is especially true of those workers who are paid by the hour. An increase in the minimum therefore increases their demands for higher wages in order to maintain their place in the structure of wages. And when the increase is as sharp as it is in H.R. 7935, the result is sure to be a fresh surge of inflation. The only place you and I disagree is with regard to the bombing. You're so goddamn concerned about the civilians, and I don't give a damn. I don't care. I'd rather use the nuclear bomb. Does that bother you? I just want you to think big. We must adopt reforms which will expand the range of opportunities for all Americans. We can fulfill the American dream only when each person has a fair chance to fulfill his own dreams. This means equal voting rights, equal employment opportunity, and new opportunities for expanded ownership, because in order to be secure in their human rights, people need access to property rights. Most days, I feel like the sole survivor of a shipwreck, rowing my paddleboat across a sea of people on waves made of an infinite array of hands and crests that reveal anonymous faces. On a good day, the clouds part to a light on low and behold an island. I step ashore, only find that it too is made of people, mangled bodies somehow still alive. They grab at my feet, pulling me under like quicksand. The last thing I see before suffocating is the sky, a billion eyes staring down, blinking in undulating electric ripples. The cold rain I feel on my cheeks is the tears of the people. The average American is just like the child in the family. I let the American people down, and I have to carry that burden for the rest of my life. My political life is over. I will never again have an opportunity to serve in any official position. Maybe I can give a little advice from time to time.